So before we jump into today's Red Rampant Rundown, just wanted to give a quick shout out to Abertay University. They asked me to come in and give a talk to their video game students, and it went really well. Their camera was on in the lecture hall. They've asked us to hide that. We're going to blur it or block it out or something like that. So nothing else I got to say. Enjoy the video, and I'll catch you with the outro.
My name's Jake. I'm 26, and a few years ago, I started my own company. I started that company to bring to life an idea I had for a game which is now out on Steam and hopefully now screen shared as well. I don't know if you guys can see that. Good.
Yes.
Yeah, it's called Red Rampant. It is out an early access on Steam. And the game is set in medieval Scotland, and the player is a boy turning man from a small village in the Highlands who, through all of their choices and decisions encountering these branching narratives presented to them, finds themselves entangled within the Scottish rebellion against the invading English, and then the default outcome of that narrative is defeat, and the player has to take this rewind potion, go back in time, and find one of the ways that they can change this overall outcome of the conflict, and not just the wider conflict, but the smaller conflicts and gameplay loops that occur before then. I'm going to jump into a quick trailer just to make sure people have some nice things to look at. I see some guy just slammed his head onto his arms on the desk. He's done for today, but that's all right. I know how you're feeling, buddy. Here's a little trailer for something you need to watch. Hopefully that clicks over. Here we go. I have no idea if you have sound. Yeah.
We don't have sound, no.
Okay, well then I have I'm gonna then just skip the trailer. If you guys don't have sound, I'll let it play in the background. You will see a couple of things on the screen. The character models are one of the main things that are going to get upgraded as the game progresses. It's a shame you can't hear because there's loads of Scottish voice acting going over this. You could think of it kind of like a Telltale-esque Life is Strange branching narrative story set in medieval Scotland. And I am now going to jump forward into talking about a few other things, because it's not just about me and it's not just about my game. This is a whole discussion about entrepreneurship and the different things that you guys want to achieve. Just going to give you a bit of backstory onto me and what I'm doing here. So we're going to talk a little bit about USP. USP is incredibly important. It's the whole reason I decided to make the game in the first place. I was chatting with some people about the different ways that the Scottish were fighting with the English back in the wars of Robert the Bruce, and I found it really interesting. And I thought to myself, that would make a great game. Why isn't that a game? And that was 7 years ago, and there's still like no mainstream game that, if we took a survey of all of the people in the lecture hall, just improv, hands up if you have heard of / played of a medieval Scotland video game.
We've got 2 hands up.
2 hands up. That is incredible. We have a room full of mostly Scottish video game developers, and 2 of them have played a game or heard of a game in medieval Scotland, which is wild because hands up who's seen a film or a TV show about Scottish medieval history. That's basically everyone, because it's a really popular story that everyone knows. And I'm sure at some point we will be leapfrogged by a massive company who comes out with a AAA game set in this space. But until then, it's kind of just us. And that's what a USP is all about. It's a unique selling point. It's something that separates you from the other people making the game. Now, our unique selling points are that we are set in medieval Scotland and that we have time rewind narrative variation. And that we have everything voice acted by Scottish talent with authentic and engaging storytelling. you will need, if you have an idea for a game or when you have an idea for a game, you will need to be able to answer this first question that maybe Simon will ask you when you walk into his office. When you say, I've got an idea for a game, he says, what's the USP? What is your elevator pitch? What is your snappy, off the top description of your game that can in some way make it unique and separate it? Just like that breathalyzer game is immediately understandable why that game is unique. And just because of that unique aspect that it is a Scottish video game, we've had a bunch of success that a small startup kind of shouldn't expect. We got nominated for the Spirit of Scotland award with Scottish Games Week. We got an article written in our game by the National, an article written about the game in the STV on their website. And I don't know how many of you know Limmy. Limmy is like the most famous Scottish streamer. At one point, he showcased the game Steam page and watched the trailer and that kind of stuff on stream, which then became his most popular clip that month, with like thousands of views. It is wild how successful you can be when you are just the only one doing a thing. So that is a big part of like having an idea and chasing that idea. But another big part of ideas is money. We are going to get more in depth into this, and I will break down all of this information about the funding that went into our game specifically and what we spent that money on. This is not something that a lot of companies do, just open the books and show what's involved in all of these processes. I'm going to talk about this more in detail later on the slides, but yeah, it's a unique opportunity for you guys to learn, to have a window into a startup and to understand what's going on in there. But let's say you got your idea, money's on the way. You're gonna come up with plans for money. We'll talk about money later. You need a team now. I don't think anyone in the history of games has made a game entirely on themselves. Even if you are like a one dev team, you need to have contacts outside of the actual dev team. And of course, inside the dev team, you will have various roles, which I don't need to explain to you. And you will need to consider things like admin support. You will need to consider support in terms of lawyers. You will need lawyers for incorporating your company. If you want to go for a company, you will need lawyers to register your trademarks, and you will need accountants. You will need accountants to do your taxes every year. If you are really well clued up on all of these different systems and you can do them yourself, that is fantastic. I will talk a little bit about being a jack of all trades, being every role, which is kind of what it takes. It's kind of my job, which is the management of all of these different people and the awareness of what it takes to do all of their different jobs and to interface with all of them and the communication involved with that. That is really important. Being able to, the more roles that you as the founder of a startup can do, the less people that you have to pay to do them. But that also means that you'll find yourself not being able to like sit down and work on the game in engine as much as you imagined you would be. That's kind of the tough give and take of running a startup, is that your time is often needed elsewhere. Yeah, accountants are really important. If you want references for lawyers and accountants, I'm sure Bell Street Ventures have people connected within the industry. We have Blackadder as our lawyers, and we have Henderson Logie as our accountants. They are both video game specialist companies. Dundee is I don't know how light or heavy the support is, but the support is definitely there for companies that are specialized in supporting video game industries. And that is actually important, and we'll get back to that when we talk about the money stuff. But finding someone who is specialized in the industry will help you unlock certain opportunities that you wouldn't get with just generic accountants. And HR, this is only really important if you have employees. which not everyone is going to go down that road. But if you do have employees, you need employment contracts, you need to run payroll, you need to do pensions, and all of that stuff is a headache. It's tough. It's not easy. You think it's easy, but yeah, HMRC and government systems are tricky to run through sometimes. And then the last one, support. Abertay and Bell Street Ventures, Business Gateway, they are fantastic at being a more generalist business specialist, but very experienced. They have people on their team that are very experienced with games, but will help with other ideas. Maybe you have a startup idea that is secretly nothing to do with games, and you want to do that anyway. Like Business Gateway are going to be very capable to help with. And I'm sure Simon is not going to kick you out of his office if you say, I have a different idea for a smart fridge. And it's not a game. He will definitely point you in the right direction. And then the Scottish Games Network is a fast-growing, really brilliant network run by a guy called Brian Baglow, and they hold events every year and do a lot of really interesting stuff. So if you are looking for wider support within the industry, you can go there. And then any specific advisors. What do I mean by any specific advisors? Well, transitioning forward into the team, I mean people who are like historical consultants or fight choreographers, people who are specific to the game that you need to make. Like I imagine in the example you gave, Simon, of the people who did the, what was it, conglomerate games, they would need like physios to speak to. They would need experts in their specific area. Now, some of you might just be making platformers and you don't need to speak to a parkour specialist about how jumping looks, but it might not even be the worst idea if you want to do that kind of thing. Like, speak to people who can give you an edge and give you a realism and give you something that is unique into your game. This is just some people in the team. I'm not going to spend everything going through everyone's backstory. Because again, there's so many different ways that you can get into this, so many different ways that you can combine these different ideas, being individual, being part of a team, being from university, being internationally collaborating. There's lots of different ways to do it. So not specifically about me or my game, but trying to give you some key information. And this is something that I think is often missed out when people start making their team. They kind of focus on the game and they forget to think about things like company ethics. Company ethics are very important. You should try and define what kind of a company you want to be. Is it important for you to make the most money in any situation, in any given situation? Are you okay with doing gambling in your game? Are you okay with having crunch? Like, this is some of our ethical policies that we have, that we talk to any collaborator that we work with, is that we are pro mental health. And what that basically means is that if someone is feeling like absolute dirt and doesn't want to work and doesn't feel like it and has just got like a searing headache and just can't look at a screen, then that's okay. Like, we understand, take a day off and your hours will just get put on the end of your contract. That is not something that a lot of companies will do. It's something that maybe you want your company to do. I don't know. This is the types of decisions that you should have early on. What are some of the ethical things that happen in your industry? What are some of the unethical things that happen in your industry, like crunch? Simon is looking with a traumatized face. Crunch, as I'm sure you is a bit of a trigger word for a lot of people here. Crunch is the concept that when a game needs to be released or a deadline is approaching, that everyone goes overtime and doesn't see their family. And it's just insane the amount of physical and mental pressure that is put on different people during that time period. To be anti-crunch is to basically say that we're not going to force people into overtime that they don't feel comfortable taking. And self-defined hours is a privilege of a lot of smart working companies that don't have to go into offices, but it basically means that you choose your own hours and work your own times, and as long as you're there for the group calls and group meetings, that's good enough for us. We're gonna come back to the money. I teased you with it earlier. It's time. This thing on the left is all of the money that went in, and this thing on the right is all of the money that went out. Funding and expenses. The numbers are slightly different because we have a little bit of money left over and other reasons. So this green one here, co-founder seed money, is the money from myself and my co-founder Chris, and it is, a lot of people might look at that and go, 21k, how'd you get all that? It is over years, lots of years, and split. So if you think of it as 21k, I can't afford 21k. If you asked me to pay you, I wouldn't. I could. It's impossible. But if you say 10k because you're splitting it with someone else, and you split it over, like, I don't know, 5 years, that's 2k a year. That's not that bad. I mean, it's bad. No one wants to pay money to anyone. But it's kind of like some people will buy a car and some people will invest in a startup. And that's kind of what Simon was talking about way back when he had his entrepreneurial slide. And he said that there is a financial risk to these things. You cannot do a startup for free. Doesn't exist. Won't happen. It's not a startup. This orange one, this video game tax relief, you should all know about it. Everyone write it down if you're writing things down, if that's what you do. Video game tax relief, or VGTR, is very, very good. It is something that we only found out about it because we had specialized accountants, but it is a system where the UK government will pay back a portion of the funding costs of your game, provided that you have certain requirements met. And you can Google this and learn it better than what I'm going to say. I'm not the guy who's going to give you all the numbers that you can write down. It also changes every now and again, but it is a thing. You should know about it if you are going to make a game yourself. University paid internships is another fantastic source of collaboration, and I will talk about that more on the next slide. Kickstarter funding grant. A lot of people are probably looking at this big blue slice and they're like, "Ooh, what's that? I want to get that. That one's good. Give me all that money, please." That was a COVID grant, so that's not a thing anymore. But that is just a lesson to say, check up what's happening. Grants can arise and they can stop, and there is no magic grant that will give you all your money unless you look for it, unless you find it, unless you get yourself calibrated for that opportunity. We have positioned ourselves and approached our company in a certain way where we are aligning ourselves with Scottish Cultural Funding grants, because that is something that we see aligns with our game, our brand, our ideology, our forward path, and that we considered that and what I'm saying is that you should consider what kind of funding you would get. These people doing the breathalyzer stuff probably got funding specialized to, like, medical support to these different people. Okay. So yeah, if you're making a 2D platformer, I don't know if there's going to be anyone who is, like, specifically going to fund your thing, but if you have something unique that I don't know what it is, and there's someone who would like to hear that, or it's educational or whatever, lots of different things that grants can be, but there's no generic grant that gives you money apart from this one, and you've all missed it. This next part is just how we spent money programming, art and design, sound and music. This was cheap because we had sound music people, like, on our team. It's normally a little bit more expensive than that, but not too much more expensive than that. Then this big slice here is so much stuff: accounting, admin, tax, like payroll, legal things, legal documents, so many different things that I can't, that if I listed would probably fill this entire slice of all the different things that you might need to pay. All of these little micro payments that don't actually, that can really sneak up on you. And then promo and strategy is just kind of like business stuff. It's to do with your marketing, it's your website costs, it's all of that kind of stuff. Try and find a way to make your website costs down, by the way. Wix Premium is not a long-term solution. You get in a lot of those, like, situations where it's really cheap to get on and then you can't really get off because that's your website and you would need to redesign it. And it's a whole thing, but be careful about your long-term subscription costs. These are called your running costs. Try and reduce your running costs as much as possible. But yeah, interns. I said we were going to talk interns. Here's the good, the bad, and the unemployable. Little reference there. We have the good, which is who we started working with in the Abertay Professional Projects module. I think, is it still third year? I think it might still be third year. We started off with a team of 8 from Abertay making our game, and we were running it with them. And that is the origin story of Red Rampant. It was actually called Fight for Freedom then. And then we lost rights to the name because we didn't trademark it. Trademark your game, please. That is a really, really interesting collaboration that you should seek out. And Abertay are really good collaborators. Another good collaborative university is one called DMU, De Montfort University in England. They have a whole university support scheme for recent graduates and that kind of stuff. We also did ones with Warwick, but not massively recommending that. DMU is more of a technical university that does have some roles that are quite linked to video game production. So here's some really important things about hiring an intern. And if you're hiring someone who is either funded by you or like half funded by you, or for example funded by the university themselves, the university might pay their wage as like a placement, and they're good, that's great. Extend their contract with your own money, that's great. It's so much better to hire someone who's good, who's already in the project, than to find a new person, because when you have a new person or a new intern or a new team member, it takes a long time to bring them up to speed with the company's vision, with the actual code, with any complicated systems that you have. So a lot of the tasks that you should do with interns should be tasks that start from very little background knowledge and can just kind of like slot in without having to integrate with the system. If you bring in an intern and you're like, I've got a bunch of bugs, can you fix them? They won't, because they won't have time to learn your whole system and to fix anything in your system. If you say, can you make me a soundtrack? They can do that, and that will add so much to your project. If you say, can you design me some concept art, or can you do a whole bunch of different things that are like isolated tasks that don't require a huge amount of prerequisite knowledge? They're the types of tasks that you want to do with interns. And then, if they're great, then you can start integrating them with the more complicated tasks. But you will get some interns who are either fresh out of university, or maybe still at university, or maybe not getting a full-time job because maybe they're not as good and they're still learning, and you're still learning how to be a boss as well. You're probably not good at that. So you're going to find some people where you're not going to get a huge amount of value out of them, and it will maybe go 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and it will feel like you've only got a week's work out of them, yet you've still put in a lot of time. And that will just be a lesson for you in management style, and is the unavoidable collaboration with some of these universities. The one thing you definitely don't do, which is something we've never done, I'm genuinely not joking here, we'd never do it, is to go back to the university and say, your intern's rubbish. Don't do that. That's not good faith. The university are giving you these collaborators to let them learn too. It's not all about you. There's a triangular relationship here, and you should consider everyone. If you have someone who's not good, then try and explain to them why they're not good, and try and explain to them how they can be better, and try and help them improve. That is very important. You are providing like an educational experience-based service, and you do need to respect your interns and help the ones who are struggling. And even if that doesn't end up with you getting any content coming out of it. So here's a little slide. I'm going to go for another 2, 3, 4 minutes, and then I'm going to fire it into Q&A. First one, no such thing as a free internship. I've talked a lot about internships. If you see something online that's like, yeah, you can have an intern, we'll pay their wage, it's completely free for you. It's not completely free for you. Your time costs money. Your time costs money, and it's going to take a lot of time, not just like onboarding them and explaining everything and doing all of that, but the emails, the forms, any documentation that you need. Maybe they need you to have a registered business address that's not your home address, and then you need to register your address with your accountants. Maybe you need them to have a software. Maybe you need some extra thing. We've had a lot of interns. I don't know, like 15 total. We've had like 35 people work on the project in total. About 15 of them have been interns. Half of them have had their contracts extended, and none of them were free. It doesn't exist. It's not a thing. And don't be tricked by that. Always have an extra bit of money. Yeah, don't trust something that says it's free. It's probably not. Bookkeeping saves time. It does. I'm not going to spend much time talking about this, but you should be logging all of your costs in a big Excel sheet and keeping an eye on it and making it really nice and formatted. And I'm sure Simon can help you with a template or something that you can use, but just write all of your expenses down, especially if they're not all coming from a business bank account, but also coming from your personal bank account. But then maybe it's a subscription that, oh no, you need to log all of that, log all of it. It will take way more time to do it at the end of the year. And you never know when you're going to need it. You don't just need that information at the end of the year. You might need to renew a license to a thing, and you might need to show all of your money. And that is very important. Bookkeeping saves time. Nurture your network. Speak to all of the people that you know that will care, that will help you, and then set up a meeting and speak with them again. Like once a month, once every couple months, you should go around all of the people that you speak to that are helping with you, that are talking with you, that are telling you your ideas are maybe kind of a little bit bad and they should be a little bit better. That is very important. Otherwise, people will forget who you are, and you'll forget who they are. And then you'll be like, who was that person that I spoke to? I never wrote down their name or ever spoke to them again. Nurture your network. And some things don't have to be started from scratch. Just because it's a startup doesn't mean everything needs to be written by your hand. Use GitHub, use the Unity asset store if you're using Unity or whatever engine you're using. Use Mixamo. Make sure your licensing is okay. Check licensing and then double check it. But yeah, you don't have to make everything yourself. You can extract pre-made content, sometimes for free, sometimes for a fee. Now, this is, I think, yeah, it's my last thing that I'm going to say. And it's about motivation. And it's very easy for you to do like the grass is greener on the other side. And I don't like being told what to do by my lecturer or by my boss. I want to do my own thing. Being your own boss is actually kind of hard. And one of the reasons it's hard is because it's all too easy to ask for a holiday. Because you don't have anyone that says you were supposed to hand that in last week. Where is it? You've botched your deadline. You need to be disciplined with yourself. You need to be regimented. If you're the type of person who buys a gym membership and never goes, or starts a diet and never does it because you're not disciplined with yourself, you're probably not going to be a very good self-boss. You need to be disciplined with yourself. You need to be accountable. And if some of you really need to be accountable, if some of you need someone to say, that's due next month, and then, you do that. If you're the type of person who does everything last minute and you need there to be a chopping block in order to get you moving, then find someone to hold you accountable. And what does that mean? Choose a friend and make a bet with them and say, I'll put a game on Steam before you do. Or have a friend or family, or have someone in your support network like Bell Street Ventures, and say, I'm going to meet you in a month, and in a month I'm going to have all of this stuff. And then it will force you to do it because someone's going to see it and say, but you said you were going to have all that stuff. What happened? So yeah, having someone to hold you accountable is great. Just like Haley's probably going to hold me accountable for the fact that I've gone on for way too long and we need to chat. So let's do some Q&A. Let's do it.
Excellent. Thank you, Jake. First, everybody, a round of applause for Jake and Simon. Jake, you were perfectly to time. Thank you. Okay, does anyone have questions for Jake or Simon? Yes. Could you hear that, Jake?
No, nothing.
No,
I saw his
okay.
mouth moving though.
Oh, that's okay. Is Red Rampant available now, or is it still early access?
Both. It is available now in early access. If you click this QR code, you can get it. But I'm just gonna type in Red Rampant on Google. I think I'm still screen sharing. Yep, here is the Steam page. It is available. I've got it in euros right now. £5. We are going to go full release in a few months, but it is available right now. Go play it. Go have fun. It's pretty cheap.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, follow-up question.
Yeah. So were they counting on early access money coming in from sales to continue to finish development, or could they finish development without it?
The question is, are you relying on early access funds in order to finish the game, or did you have enough funds to fund the whole development? What's the reasoning behind the early access?
So early access it's a very good question. Why are we doing early access? We're doing early access because we need people to test the game, to try and find out where the bugs are, find out what people like, find out what kind of changes we need to make. And this was our best way of engaging with people in that. The funding from sales aren't required to fully finish what we need to do to fully release. But the community engagement, the testing, the feedback, the interaction, the back and forth is really important in order to get that full release. And it also that release also prompted some people who were interested in investment contacting us. So we might have a little bit more money to play with because we released it in early access. And it also allows us to establish a social media like hype, a buzz, something that we can refer to kind of build a momentum to a full release. A lot of companies who have already released prior titles will already have prior momentum that they can build and say, hey, look, we made all that other stuff. Look what we're about to make next. But it's very difficult to say, look what we're about to make next when you can't point to other stuff that you've already made. And this is our first game, so we needed something to point to.
Yeah, just to add into that, that's a really good point. This bit around like trying to make something perfect and forever kind of polishing that product or service before you launch it could be really, really dangerous, because it's that whole point that you're trying to get a product market fit. So that's where, even if you just bring in like general business lessons, like you can get someone, an engineer, who spends years and years perfecting the perfect little widget, and then they go to try and release it, and they've not spoken to anyone, they've not spoken to their market before they've actually put this thing out, and then they realize, oh, nobody wants it. So that's where this whole like agile approach of going, right, what can we do that gets something out, that gets people interested in it, that gets people playing something, that gets people even paying something, and then using that as your evidence base to show why you're onto something, that you can then look for investment or look for partners or look for a publisher to show, right, yeah, you're going to go and take that to the next level now. Because the games industry is so tough, so tough in terms of creating something that everyone's going to love, like, and buy and play. So the more that you can reduce the risk in that by bringing it out incrementally and building that community behind it, shows you've got an opportunity. And the UK Games Fund have got like follow-on funds and things. So if you show that you've got something that's actually working, then you're potentially more likely to go and get a UK Games Fund grant for taking that on to the next bit.
Yeah, and that's relatively new. that's only within the last year or so that they've started doing kind of follow-on funding as opposed to just startup funding. Okay, other questions? Yep. What's been your total development time on the game?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question, because it's a difficult one to answer. I first came up with, I said 7 years ago when I first came up with the idea. I was a lifeguard at the time. I don't know if any of you have ever been with a lifeguard, but it's kind of boring because most of the time people are just swimming and doing nothing. And I needed to occupy my mind. I got a very active mind. So I just world built and made all of the ideas for like a couple of years until I had a huge amount of documents and files where I wrote all of my descriptions for how the game was all going to work. It was an accumulated amount of writing longer than the first Harry Potter book at the time. And that is then, after those 2 years, when I started kind of like building out that team that I show you there. They're all core members who've been with us for a very long time. The company incorporated in 2020, and that's when the professionals project module started. So from like team of devs working on the game, like 3.5 years, because it was January 2021 is when the module started, till early access launch, and then 4 years total from like dev team to launch. But that's another very important thing, which is this concept of you shouldn't bring in programmers and developers and all of that kind of stuff and spending money until you know everything about the game that you want to make. You really need to have everything planned out and try and come up with as much as possible on the fly as you can, because when it's on the fly, it costs money. And whilst it's just your ideas, that's when you need to do the most amount of testing, and speak to people about it. Go up to strangers and meet them. That's how I met my co-founder. He was in Glasgow Central Station. I just went up and spoke to him, and we made a game together. And the last thing that I'll say with reference to that is I've not been full-time for a lot of that. I've been full-time for part of it, but I also have another job, and sort of some of the other people on the team. Having another job is not a shameful thing. It's not an admission of defeat or failure that you have another job. That is just how you remain financially stable, how you keep eating, sleeping, and going for pints, whilst also working on your side venture. So I'm not going to say side hustle, Simon. It's not Bell Street Hustles. That would be an interesting American counterpart, though.
Excellent. We've got time for one more question. Yes.
When it comes to startups, be working in person better or working online be better?
The question is, when it comes to startups, is it better, in your opinion, to work in person or online?
I would say when you say working in person, if you mean like have an office that you like go to and have everyone set up like a big LAN party of you all working together, that's very expensive. It's really expensive. You know how rent is a lot? Imagine that, but you're paying an extra one, and it's maybe even more, and you've got all of these extra taxes that you need, and you don't have an income while you're still making the game. So don't aim for offices, but if you can meet up in the library, meet up in your houses, and like do a homemade LAN party, or maybe your roommates, or maybe you've all got laptops and you go to the beach, or you just go out for drinks or whatever and just talk about it. That's great. That's absolutely great. You should meet up with your team, not just formally where you constantly work on the game, but also informally to allow you to kind of form those relationships. And in those moments when you're not talking about the game, that's often when you have your best idea, is because you're just allowing everything to kind of come together and come to its place. So I would encourage collaborating with your team and meeting up with your team. But if you all do your work, like the hard grind, separately in separate buildings in separate places, or even in separate countries, that's completely fine. But yeah, calling your team, speaking to your team, meeting them in person is great, but offices are very expensive. I know there's probably a bunch of like office incentive schemes of people who are very eager to give you office space, and maybe you can get yourselves involved in some of that. But I don't think it's a requirement until you're at like 10 fixed employees or something like that. Simon, what do you think about that?
I think that's an interesting one. Based on like the way that the working world has gone since lockdown, there's a lot of game studios that are struggling to get people back in the office, and software development studios that are struggling to get people back in. There's a massive benefit to having a regular time when people can come together and develop and code and work together in the same room. It's not necessarily something that has to happen full time. So, like Jake's saying, but so from an experience of a dev team that I've been working with, they met up for the first time after maybe working on a project for about 18 months. They met in person first time on Wednesday last week, and just the whole morning was spent with them working away in the same office, and they loved it. Now, would they love it as much if they were doing that 5 days a week? I don't know. I think there is maybe something to be said about potentially having a thing where people meet up every couple of weeks, and there are spaces available for that kind of thing. So things like Bell Street Ventures is a space to use. There's the Flour Mill in Dundee that's co-working space. There's Launch It along the road from us that Conglomerate Games are in, and Astro Dreamer were in. So there are spaces around that you can then book out spaces for a day and things, and that's potentially a better way of doing it. But you think about the positives of also being able to work remotely and thinking about, well, actually we can bring in expertise that's halfway around the world that you wouldn't normally be able to work with. There are a lot of benefits in that way, but just making the most of those in-person opportunities when you get them is also really useful.
Yeah, and some of the differences between what you're describing there, where like a team will meet up in a space they don't own and just have a chat and maybe do it sporadically, maybe do it consistently, but it's not their place that they're renting. They don't have the running costs. It's not leased to them. As soon as you get a contract to do any of those kind of things, you lock yourself into that. You can't take breaks. If someone gets really poorly or wants to be in a different place or moves to a different part of the city and then they're commuting all of this time, try not to lock yourself into any like fixed contract or like, oh, we'll just pay for 6 months use of this space. Don't do that. I would recommend not to do that, and just try and find those places and maybe meet up once a week, twice a week in those opportunities, but try not to lock in any fixed costs right now, and just maybe try a few different combinations and see what works best for you.
Hello, me again. Thanks for sticking around. Can't believe you actually did. It's crazy. Wanted to give another shout out to Abertay and let you know about 2 more videos, 2 more Red Rampant Rundowns we got in the pipeline. Next one is going to be the origin story of Chris, me, the company, how it all got started, which is pretty unexpected if you don't know it, so stick around for that. And then after that, we got one I'm really excited for, where we are finally giving Arthur, the big teeth pose guy from the pre-release version, a new character model and an exciting new backstory, which we are going to share with you guys later on. So subscribe and yeah, stay tuned. Catch you around. Bye.